I'm Kathy Burns from the Canton County Cooperative Extension Service. Today we're going to talk about food dehydration. First thing I want to mention as we talk about dehydration is using, once again, a reliable source of information. First of all, you've probably got a nice book if you have a dehydrator. Please look at that. It gives you great directions for it. It gives you some recipes and some ideas for some other things that you can dehydrate. But we have some nice publications. We've got a drying food at home publication we are happy to provide you with from UK Extension. We've also got one on jerky safety. So we want to make sure we do safe product dehydration as always. So today I've got a couple dehydrator styles in front of me, but before we talk about that, we're going to talk about just what is dehydration. And dehydration is basically removing moisture because bacteria, fungus, mold, they love moisture, and that's when they grow and that's when they thrive. So by removing as much of that as we can, it becomes a great way to preserve food. As you can imagine, food dehydration is one of the earliest ways that man learned to preserve food because we just put stuff out in the sun and you dry things. So it's still that same concept. We've just learned a lot more, and now we've got some aids that we can use at home that will make life a lot easier for dehydrating products. So the other thing that dehydrating does besides removing the moisture is it inactivates enzymes. So all fruit, vegetables, all foods have enzymes in them. Even when we remove them from the stem, those enzymes are still working. Think about how a piece of fruit, a piece of vegetable, anything like that will rot eventually if you just let it sit. That's that enzyme action. So by drying, by applying heat, we can help inactivate some of those enzymes so that, again, the product stays a little bit better, a little bit longer. We do have flavor enhanced because we've removed moisture, so you often get a nice, stronger flavor of maybe a particular fruit that you've done, and the nutrients are more concentrated. So when you dehydrate, first of all, you'll realize if you've done any research on it, it is not an exact science. There's so many variables. And as you look at recipes, as you look at your book, it might say dehydrate from 4 to 12 hours or from 24 to 31 hours. And that's because we have so many variables. The first is that humidity. You know, we do live in a humidity intense area, and that can make it take longer to dehydrate. How thick you slice your food. You know, that could vary on the time, of course. And the food itself, different foods have different amounts of water in them, so they can just take longer as well. But the good thing about most of the ways that we can dehydrate is that it's very easy to check. It's not like when we're canning and we don't want to disturb any of the pots of boiling water. We can lift a lid if we're using a dehydrator. We can check things outside if we're drying that way. So very easy way to do it. So why would we dehydrate? Of course, like we said, a method of food preservation. A lot more of us are doing gardens today, and my garden's doing well, and I'm ready to dehydrate. I picked some herbs that I was able to do. I'm just starting to get tomatoes, some zucchini, so why not? I can dehydrate it as a way of keeping it, storing it in a nice compact way, and having it available later in the year. So what's so nice about it too, like we talked about, very small volume. When we dehydrate, we take a amount of food and it becomes about 20 to 25% of the weight that it started. So again, much more compact, easy to store, easy to pick up and go. That's a good thing about dehydrated foods. It's a healthier snack alternative. Again, you can do what you want with it, and we're going to show you a couple things that can save you from buying something commercially that you can enjoy it making at home. And again, we've got a longer way of storing food. So I just want to mention nutrients a little bit. Again, it's not an exact science because, again, the product that we started out with, what shape was it in? Was it fresh? Was it at its peak? At different times of the year, nutrients are a little bit stronger. But anyway, generally, when we dehydrate food, we'll get twice the amount of calories, but of course we've got it much more compact. Think of a bunch of raisins versus a bunch of grapes and how they just compact from grape to raisin when we dehydrate them. So we have more calories, but again, more intense. Fiber stays the same, so that's a good thing. Most of us need more fiber, so that's a good thing. Carbohydrates are going to be more intense again because the natural sugar that's in that food is going to be more concentrated. Minerals are good, especially iron in a lot of these things that we dehydrate. That's a great thing to do. The main things we lose are, as you can imagine, water-soluble vitamins because we're removing water. So a lot of the B-complex vitamins, vitamin C, and some of the minerals. But you know, a lot of us don't live a lot of life eating a lot of dried food. So it's not a big nutrition concern. We can get good nutrition throughout the day. It's just a good way to accent it and enjoy it. So when we dehydrate, we have many different ways we can try to do it. Again, we mentioned this has been around forever, and the historic way to do it would be sun drying. So sun drying is basically putting a food out in the sun. But as you can imagine, in our climate here in northern Kentucky, as you know, it's hot, which is good. We want to have temperatures over 85, but the humidity is the issue. You want to have humidity less than 60%, and that is not often happening here. So it doesn't make it very good to do. The other thing is we don't have usually many breezes, and we need airflow when we dehydrate too. There are people that do it. You can do it. You can do it outside, but you've got to be very careful because we've got to watch out for insects, of course, too. So probably not the best way to do it. We certainly don't want to dry meat or most vegetables outside either because of big food safety concerns. You can vine dry some things if you're growing beans, dried beans, some lentils, things like that. You can actually let them dry on the plant, and when they're dry they'll kind of rattle, and then you can come in and take them out of the pods and use them as dried beans. So that is a way you could do that at home. But one thing we want to recommend is that anytime you dry anything outside, so the sun drying or the vine drying, you're going to need to pasteurize it. So you're going to have to do a heat or cold treatment to those foods after you bring those in. And we can give you details on how to do that. But again, it's just anything that's been outside because, again, we've had opportunities to introduce more bacteria, more insects, things like that. So please pasteurize anything that you dry outside. Microwave drying is not really recommended. It's really not good for your microwave. First of all, you have to do it a really long time. I mean, I've seen some recipes, not good ones, that said to dry 35 minutes. That's a really long time for your microwave to run. You know you have hot spots in your microwave. It's just natural, it has that. And there's not a lot of air movement, right? Again, we don't have anything to move that air around. So it's really not recommended you do that. Some people do some herbs in there, and that could be done, but check your book. The thing about herbs, they don't take very long. So that's a possibility, but generally we don't recommend it. You can do it in your oven, but probably not your best opportunity, but it can be done. You need to make sure your oven can go down to 140 degrees. It is recommended that the doors stay open and that you attach a little fan to it so that you're blowing air, right? You might wonder then if you have a convection oven, which has the fan in the back, if you could do that. But again, we recommend the door be open a little bit, and you probably have the same thing I have. When you open your door, the fan on your convection oven will stop. So you can do it. It's a much more expensive way to do it, and it does heat up your house more. But again, we have some information if you want it. We don't want to dehydrate at too high of a temperature, otherwise we end up cooking the food and not drying it. So the outside gets done and the inside doesn't. That's a condition they call case hardening. Again, the outside is done, the inside is not. So it can be done, but it takes a long time. It takes 2 or 3 times longer than if you do it in a dehydrator. So the good thing about dehydrators, they've really come down in price. I've seen them as low as $30, $35. I've seen them as high as $300, so it's whatever you want. They come in a lot of different styles. This is kind of a traditional one. This is a least pricey version. And the way this is made, they call these kind of a tower type, and it has the heating unit in the bottom, and there is a fan, and it does have this little metal shield over the top, which is nice because as you dry food, it falls down there. You know, of course, it gets a lot smaller. You could have a temperature control that works like this. This is a dial, and this one goes from 95 to 160 degrees. That's a really nice range because you'll use lower temperatures on things like herbs and higher ones if you're going to do things like jerky. But you might have a digital one that has where you can push up and down the bottom, the buttons to make it work, and have a timer on there as well. I've also got, next to this dehydrator, one of those multi-pots. A lot of folks have these multi-pots too, and some can dehydrate and some can't. So you're going to have to check your book. This particular one does have a dehydration button on it, so when I plug it in, I can program it to that. It has a default temperature, but I can take that down if I want to. It's very easy to do, and I can set a timer on this, so it will shut down when I want, or I can just open it and close it. So if you have a pot like this, you have a couple options. With this particular one, I can put slices of food down here in the bottom. And if I want, this is my air frying basket that came with this one. I could put that on top of those slices and put some more in there. But I don't have a very large area, as you can see. Now I can buy a dehydration rack for these, and you can buy them online, and I've seen them. They're like a little metal food drying rack, and they stack about 4 high, and they sit down in there. Instead, you wouldn't put this basket in, you would set those inside, and then you could get more layers. So that's another option. If you have one of those pots, you can do that. You just can't get as much done at a time, but I have dehydrated these types next to each other, and they're very comparable in how quick and how well they do. It did a good product, but that's just another option if you have one. Okay, I want to show you a couple things that might come if you have just kind of a standard dehydrator like this. As you can see, I've got a lot of different shelves on here, and I can stack this as high as the company says I can. And so read your directions. One of them I have says I should operate it with 4 of these shelves going on at one time. They just recommend that for airflow. I will say if you stack them up, it is recommended as you're using them to rotate them. You know, so maybe after 2 hours or so, you can just move them around. What's nice about this is, again, we have hot air, but it's not terribly hot air. So while this is operating, I can remove this lid, and I can move things around, and it doesn't burn me or anything, and I can just leave it going. So you have your base, like I talked to you about, which has the heating unit in it, usually. I've seen one where the heating unit's in the top, so it just depends. But then you've got our lid. These are all really easy to wash, which is nice. The shelf that I showed you, these are good for just normal size pieces of food. So if I'm going to do some zucchini slices, I can lay those on here. If I'm going to do jerky, I can lay those on here. If I'm getting things that are going to get smaller, then I would want to use these mesh screens. Sometimes they come with your dehydrator. Sometimes you have to buy them separately, but they're not very costly. And I find them to be very helpful because, as we know, when we dehydrate, we're removing water, so the food's going to get smaller. And some of these things, if we put them on these shelves, they just fall through to the bottom. So by using that mesh screen, that can really help you out, especially with herbs. That's what they were created for. But if I've had small pieces of vegetables, I put them on there too, and it just helps it keep it a little bit better. The other thing you might have is one of these kind of solid sheets. And these are if you're going to make like a fruit or a vegetable leather, where you would just puree a fruit or vegetable and put them on here. And then you would put that on top of your shelf and dehydrate. So anyway, just a lot of options. It's a lot of fun. It's a nice family activity because, again, it's relatively safe. Of course, I wouldn't want a child doing this without adult supervision, but it can be easily made a family thing. So I think you can have a lot of fun with it. All right, now we're ready to dehydrate fruit. So like any other food, some fruits dehydrate better than others, but you can certainly play around, look at recommendations in your book and in our instruction manuals that we can send to you as well. But of course, we want to start with good quality food. Anytime we do any kind of food preservation, as you know, you've got to start with good quality. It's not going to get any better after you preserve it. So have it at the peak of its freshness and nothing starting to rot or anything like that. We want to have good things like that. We want to, of course, wash it well. There could be microorganisms on these food, and one of the great ways we can stop that is just by washing. Usually running cold water. Bigger pieces you can rub with your hands, but start with that. And then dry them, of course. You're going to cut them into uniform size pieces. You don't want to have your dehydrator with some big pieces and little pieces because, of course, they're going to dehydrate at different amounts of time, and you're just going to spend a lot of time checking and going back and forth with that. So be sure and slice them uniformly. Remove any bad spots, of course. Some things you're going to peel, some things you're not. Depends on what you're going to do with them afterwards. We've got apples here that all have their peeling on, but you could peel them if you wanted. One of the things you almost always want to do when you dehydrate is to spray your trays with just some spray oil. It just helps. You know, these things are sticky because, of course, we're giving off moisture, and it makes cleanup a lot easier. So that is a good help for you in your kitchen. And also, after the things are dried and you determine that they're ready to package, let them sit a few minutes on the tray, but not real long, because again, if they're sticky, if I've got a dehydrated blueberry and I let it sit on there, it can stick too long. So remove them when they're warm and just lay them out on a paper towel or something. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on finishing up. So when we do our fruits, we're going to do some kind of pre-treatment often. Not always, but often. So you know that when you cut an apple, after a few seconds, sometimes it can turn brown. So as we dehydrate them, we want to try to keep them with a good color. So we're going to do some kind of pre-treat with them so that they have a nicer appearance. Pre-treatment can also help keep some of the vitamins A and C that are in your fruits. So we want to do that as well. A lot of different ways you can do that. You might do a lemon juice mixture, you could do a honey mixture, you could put some kind of syrup on it. Usually I just soak it in lemon juice water like I do if I'm preparing fresh apples for a tray, but it's up to you. We have options that you can try. Not all things need to be pre-treated with a cover-up like that, like a blueberry. We don't need to do that, but we do need to do another process with those. So think about a blueberry, a grape, things like that that have this nice protective coating on the outside. So when we go to dehydrate these, they can be a problem because this is so protective that what can happen, it just takes forever to dehydrate. And the outside will get really done before the inside even gets softened. So we want to basically split all those skins. And so there's a process called checking. And what you do is we would take these berries, put them in a basket like this, or just some kind of strainer that you have that can be heated. You might have an insert to your pot, something like that. And we would take these berries and we would put them in here. And then I would have a pot of boiling water in here, and I will just take and set that into that boiling water. And it might only take 15 seconds, 30 seconds. You just want to look at your berries, and when you start to see them split, that is it. We're not trying to cook them, we just want to split that skin. So then I would remove them, and I would put them in ice water so they don't cook, and then I would dry them off really well as I got ready to dehydrate them and put them on my tray. So again, grapes, blueberries, things like that that just have a tougher skin on it. Otherwise, we're usually just slicing our product. As you can see, we have our apples here. You can slice them to the thickness that you desire. If you're going to be cooking with them, you might want them one thickness. These are a little bit thicker. Or some people like to do these with crafting, making wreaths, making potpourri, things like that. And that, at times like that, you might want to slice them a little bit thinner. That's up to you. But again, you just want to do them uniform on the tray that you're going to be using for your dehydration purposes. Look at the difference in these apples too. These are different variety apples. Even though we did pre-treat them, I did put all of them in a lemon juice mixture. Some apples just darken more than others, and that's just the nature of the beast. But often we are gonna, if I'm gonna cook with these, I would probably be making an apple pie or an apple crisp or something like that, and it's gonna have a topping on it. Or if I'm crafting with it, it really doesn't matter. There's some rustic, really pretty wreaths I've seen with dehydrated apples, and they look fine that way too. Other ways that you can pre-treat if you have to is by blanching. You more often do that when we do vegetables, but you can do steam blanching or water blanching. That's another possibility too. I think it's time to do some strawberries. So I have have my nice fresh strawberries here. I went ahead and I removed the stems, washed them really well, and they are dry. This is a time, if you've got really, really juicy berries, they don't do as well. Those are the ones you want to snack on because they're nice and good. Because, again, we're removing moisture, so a berry that's not quite as juicy is going to do a little bit better. So, again, the main thing I want to do is just slice these uniformly. So, again, about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, just depending on what you're going to do with them. That's what I have for my berries. Now when you go to dehydrate fruits, variety of times, as we talked about at the beginning, they'll say from 3 to 12 hours, and it just depends on what you're doing. I've had bananas take a long, long, long time. Strawberries have done pretty well, but you're going to slice them. And we've got this tray started, where I have them on my mesh tray, because again, they're going to get a lot smaller after I dehydrate them. So as you can see, I tried to keep these are probably about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm going to place the rest of these. You want to have space in between them, as I've done, because again, of air movement. Again, if I've got several stacks of these that I'm doing, I might need to rotate them during the process. And again, when you talk about thickness, we always want to go pretty thin, but on a dehydrator style like this where the fan's in the bottom, you are limited on how thick you can put something because of the tray or the lid, how far it goes, but this is a thickness that I would want. You might have a dehydrator that has a fan in the back. Those allow for a little bit thicker slices, but again, you usually have to rotate the slices on those. So at this point, we would take our berries. They're ready to go. I can put the lid on. I'm going to turn this on. For fruits, I usually do between 135 and 140 degrees, so I would set my dial, turn it on, and go do some chores because it's going to take several hours. As this is drying, after a couple hours, it's not a problem for you to lift that lid up, give them a look. That might be a time when I've got to rotate trays. It's not a big deal to do that. Just put the lid back on and it'll be ready to go. So it's been several hours. And we've been checking on our berries, and I think they're doing pretty good. And you'll probably be surprised at how they turned out. Look how they've shrunk. We're going to flip that off. And here's our berries. So how do you tell when they're done? With most fruits, we like them leathery. And as you can see with these, they're bendy, and so that's a good thing. But I want to make sure they're done. So I want to take that fruit, I want to fold it back on top of itself, okay? And it should not stick to itself, because if it does, there's probably too much moisture in there, so you can see how this one is not sticking to itself. And I also can take just a visual look at it. I can kind of squeeze it and make sure I'm not seeing any droplets of moisture. So that means this is done. Some people like their fruit a little more done. I could certainly dehydrate this a little bit longer if I wanted and get them crispy. So that's how we check for doneness on our fruits. I've got some apples here I can show you too. I've done. These are done, leathery, nice, but again, they don't stick on themselves. And if I squeeze them, apples are a really kind of good one that you can see if there's little droplets of moisture on them, then they're ready. These are a little bit more done. I did dehydrate these a little bit longer, but most of the time when we're doing our fruits, we're going to either rehydrate them for a dessert or something. We might just want them to munch on or put them in a trail mix. That's what a lot of people like to do with their fruits. So it's up to you whether you want it a little bit more done or a little less done. That's all up to you. After these have been dehydrated and cooled, maybe 5-10 minutes, I want to go ahead and do something with them. I want to put them in a glass jar, a heavier plastic bag, some kind of storage unit, because there is humidity in our atmosphere, and if I leave these sitting out too long, they're going to reabsorb moisture and they're not going to be dehydrated the way we want them. Then they have more opportunity to mold. So we want to get them into some kind of container, and we want to do what we call conditioning. And conditioning is placing them in a glass jar. This is a canning jar I have. With the lid. I want to put them in there where I've got a lot of room. I could get more in here, but I don't want to pack them. I want to be able to shake these up, and I want to check on them once a day for at least 7 days, 7 to 10 days. And what that shows me is if they are too moist, if they're not dried enough, I'll get condensation on my jar from the moisture. And of course we don't want that because that's going to start mold or other bacteria growth. If I notice that day 1, day 2, I can put them back on my tray and dehydrate them a little bit longer. But we should do that. I will do that with my berries. I've got some orange slices I did here. So I've had them in the jar conditioning and they're fine. Orange slices are one of those things that you can dehydrate to eat, but it's not on the recommended list just because you don't get a lot. They're such a juicy food, but they're great for crafting, but they certainly can be dehydrated. So just be sure to condition, watch for moisture. If you have it, you can put that food back on the dehydrator after a day or 2 and dry it some more. And then what that does is it evens out the moisture in the different apple slices. If one's a little drier, if one's not as dry, they get to a medium where they're just well and ready to store. Now we're going to make some fruit leather. These are so nice, they're easy, and they're much more nutritious than types that you can buy in the grocery store. You can do it any way you want. That's the other great thing. So today I'm going to do a blueberry leather. So I went ahead and took a couple cups of blueberries and I put them in my blender and just pureed them with a couple tablespoons of honey and a tablespoon of lemon juice. And that just helps develop the flavor a little bit. So I do have that ready for us. I'm going to get our dehydrator. And this is a time when I do want to use that solid plastic sheet. That's what those are for. Be sure and spray them because it makes cleanup so much easier. You really do need to spray it. So I'm going to set that right on top of there. And then I'm going to take my mixture and I'm going to pour it on our tray. It's very juicy, of course. That's okay. I want to spread this around evenly. So it might be easier for you to put that down flat. And you also don't risk it getting down into your dehydrator motor. You don't want that. But we want this to be about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch. And sometimes you just gotta mess with it a little bit. So I usually, of course, spread it with my spatula, and sometimes I just do some soft tapping to kind of help even that up. Because of course it's gonna dry in one nice solid sheet, so we want it all to be covered, because we'll be able to just peel that whole sheet off together. This can take, oh gosh, 3, 4, 5 hours, depends. Again, it's really easy to check this to make sure it's dehydrating well. A little thicker area over here. Again, that's sometimes when you just kind of pat it. If you have any little bare areas, just go back and fill them in, kind of like touching up the frosting on the top of a cake. Light touch. All right. And we're going to take this, going to lift this onto our dehydrator, put the lid on. It's about 145 degrees for several hours. Okay, again, it's really easy to check this anytime you want. During the process, lift the lid and you'll have a nice product. You will see our finished leather. Now, of course, it didn't dry like this. I've already had this one dried and I cut out some pieces so that you could see it here. But when it's done, it will just peel right off of this sheet. So you can leave your dehydrator running to test it, but just lift it, kind of grab an end, and see if it's still sticky, if it's not coming up easily like this, it needs a little bit more time. But again, easy, easy, easy. So once it's all done, then I would turn that off. I would put that back on my counter. And here I've got some cut in slices. So you can make little rolls for kids. You can cut up in little pieces for a trail mix. Just eat it, it's yummy. So again, that was just blueberries. You could easily do that with strawberries. It's nice to mix fruits, strawberries and bananas, things like that. You can add sweetener or not. That's up to you. It depends on the sweetness of your fruit and if you want it a little bit sweeter. One of the easiest ones to do is applesauce, and I do this one quite frequently. Here's some applesauce I did earlier. And again, it'll just peel off when it's done. So what I do, if I'm not going to use this right away, I'll just go ahead and peel this off. I lay it on a big piece of plastic wrap and I roll it together, and so then I have one big roll, and then I can cut it later. It will last several weeks. If I want to keep it longer, I'll keep it in the refrigerator. It's about 2 weeks, but longer in the fridge. You can actually freeze this too. But I just want to show you when I do applesauce, so of course then I don't have to puree anything. I'll just get a couple of these, 2 of these little size containers, actually just fit right on there. I can buy flavored applesauces. I could put cinnamon right on here. I could do that with any of these. I could add any special herbs. And it's just a nice, easy treat. You can also do them with vegetables, but in most cases you're gonna have to cook your vegetables. One that comes to mind that I've had is a sweet potato one. I think I've had a pumpkin one as well too. And you can imagine, put a little cinnamon in there. That makes a nice roll up too. Now we're gonna dehydrate some vegetables. Why would you want to dehydrate vegetables? Well, of course, it's another way to preserve foods, but what's really nice about dried vegetables, they dry very crunchy usually. They're about 10% moisture. When we talked about fruits, we usually dehydrate them to about 20% moisture. You can't really tell that at home as far as measuring, but again, the fruits are pliable, where these are usually a little bit more crunchy and done. So with these, I could rehydrate them for vegetable soup, tomato sauces, any kind of mixed kind of casserole. Sky's the limit, or as we talked before, you could bake, I've even seen vegetable leathers made with tomatoes and some herbs and all kind of different things. So you've got a lot of good options there too. So when we're dehydrating our vegetables, we want to do the same general principles as we did with our fruit. We want to be very clean, of course, remove any bad spots on them, and then cut them into nice uniform pieces. You can slice them if you're good at that. Some folks use a mandolin. Just be very careful. They're very sharp. Or often I will slice things with my food processor. Just depends on how thin I want them to be sliced. We just want to prepare though what we're getting ready to dry. I don't want to go ahead and cut up a whole bunch of carrots if I've only got 2 trays. Just try to make it match so that we're not losing nutrients as we go day after day in this drying process. So we're going to have to do some kind of pre-treatment. If you remember with the fruits, we did it mostly for darkening purposes, but as we said, it helps to keep some of the vitamins, stops that enzyme action that deteriorates the products as well. With vegetables, what we do is we usually blanch them. We're not going to do like lemon juice or honey or ascorbic acid, things like that. We're going to blanch. So today I'm just going to show you how to steam blanch. It's a really quick and easy way. Check your chart in the book to see what is recommended for the particular food. Often you have both options. It just depends. Steam blanching takes a little bit longer, but the food is not, of course, immersed into the boiling water as it would if we were going to water blanch it. So we're going to do some carrots. I've got some I call them little carrot pennies here that I have sliced up. I'm going to put them into my steamer basket here. You don't want to have your food any more than a couple inches thick if you're going to steam blanch. So we're going to move over here to our stove where I have my water boiling. I just have a couple inches. I do not want it touching the food, but what I'm going to do is put my basket in here. I'm going to put my lid back. We're going to keep that water boiling, and I'm going to start timing now since my water is boiling. If it goes down a little bit, you can turn your stove up, but we are boiling here. And check your guidelines in your book on the length of time. For carrots, it's 3 to 3.5 minutes. So at this time, I'd start timing my carrots, and I'm going to steam blanch them for 3.5 minutes. So our time is up on our carrots. I'm going to remove the lid, turn my heat off. And you will see the steam blanching and the blanching really helps set the color. I don't want it to cook, so I'm going to put this right into my ice water, all right, and just to get those cooled off. We are blanching to help preserve color, as we said, talk about stopping the enzyme action, and just prepare them for our drying process. There are 4 vegetables that you really don't need to pre-treat: tomatoes, onions, green peppers, or mushrooms. But other ones you will want to blanch. It really can make a difference. So I've got these in here. I don't need these to be completely chilled like we do usually when we blanch, because I'm going to be drying them, right? I'm going to be applying heat right away. So they are warm to my touch. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to put them on a clean towel or paper towel, whatever you want, because I want to dry them. I don't want to start with a wet product in my dehydrator, right? Because it's just going to take longer. So I'm going to lay those on there and just get those nice and dry. At this point, I'm ready to take my dehydrator with my carrots, depending on the size of the pieces. Sometimes I'll put that mesh piece on, sometimes I won't. But one thing I will do is to spray my tray just lightly. And then I'm going to lay my carrots out just like we did with our berries and just like you would do with other foods. A little bit of space in between them, fill that tray up, and you can do more as you need them. When they're done, these can take, 6, 8, 10 hours. It depends on how big I slice them. I've got some here that I did yesterday. So these are some little carrot pennies again. I sliced these on my food processor, so they were a little bit thinner than the ones I just did. They were done in about 3 hours, and this is how they turned out. They're very crunchy, as you can tell. That would be great to store, to put into a soup at a later time. So that's something that I would probably do with them. Let's see, I've got some other things here that I've dried. These are some tomatoes, some larger tomatoes that I did, and I've got some cherry tomatoes here as well. But these were bigger ones that I did. I sliced these again really thin. And what I can do with these, again, I could put them in a soup. I could make tomato sauce with these. If you look at these that I did over here, these are cherry tomatoes. I just happen to have a bunch at home, so I decided to dry them. So I sliced them evenly and just put them on the dehydrator. Now they get a little like leathery and crunchy because there's a lot of meat, inside of those. If you see the green spots on some of these, I decided to dry these with some herbs on top. So I just cut some of my basil and put it on the tomatoes at the beginning and just dried them together. So again, that would be really good for a sauce. So I started out with the cherry tomato, I cut it into slices, and then this is what I ended up with. I took some of those then and I ran them through my food processor again, so I have like little tomato granules. And again, that could be used in a recipe to add extra tomato flavoring. It may be a little bit of thickening, but it's all tomato so that it's all good stuff, ready to go. Here I've got some green peppers that I've dehydrated. They dehydrate very well, and as we said, we don't need to blanch those, but they're ready. This is actually some kale I did. Kale, lettuce, things like that, it's really not recommended to hydrate them because they're so watery, as you know. I did it because I had a few pieces left, and again, I could throw that in a soup, so you certainly could do that, but it takes a long time and you get a very, very small yield. Again, we usually get a 20 to 25% yield after the product from when we start, and you're probably going to have smaller with a leafy food like that. I'm going to show you a couple other things that I dehydrated. This is some red onion. When you do vegetables, you're going to do the same thing as far as conditioning that we talked about in the fruit section. After they're dried, and I'm pretty sure they're dry enough, I'm going to put them in a jar with enough room so that I can shake them once a day and make sure there's no condensation forming, so I know that they're nice and dry. So these, I can still smell. A little caution on that if you're drying onions at home. It is kind of pungent because, as we know, onions are. People ask about drying foods together. This is one food I wouldn't want to dry with anything else because it will impart that strong odor or flavor. At least some of it, you'll get a little bit of it. Some of the milder things you could dry, like a tray of carrots and a tray of potatoes. That would be okay. But they do very well. Again, remember to condition.
first thing I want to show you are these potatoes. So potatoes, they store very well at home, and you may not feel the need to dehydrate, but it's an interesting concept, and I want to show you what I've done here. These were just what we call them red skins, just a waxy red skin potato. These I peeled. It is recommended that you peel them, and I sliced these pretty thin on my food processor, so they're almost like a potato chip. I could have gone thicker. It would have been fine. It would have taken a little bit longer to dry, but that would have worked. These are ones that, as you can see, I left the peel on. You know, I a little more fiber and a little more nutrition, and if I'm gonna maybe cut this in half, or I could probably just break it and put it into some soup, that'll be fine. There's some really not attractive pieces here. These were also some red skin potatoes that I did. And I just want to show you how important it is to do that pre-treatment. These are the same product. These was just a little bit smaller potato, but these were not pre-treated. So the way we steam blanched those carrots, I did that to the potatoes, and I came out with these really pretty potatoes. These I didn't steam blanch, and they came out this not very pretty grayish color. So not only is the pre-treatment good for starting to loosen skins and again keeping some of our nutrients in it, but they do yield a much better product for long-term storage. So check your references. There's lots of different vegetables that you can dehydrate and use at a later date, and enjoy. It's time to dehydrate some herbs. I grow a lot of herbs in my garden, and they are coming on great right now, but I have a lot of them. So it's time to do something with them so I can enjoy them later in the year. So we can dehydrate them. When you go to dehydrate your herbs, you want to pick them. It's preferable to pick them in the morning. They say like right after the dew has come off of them, they're a little bit fresher. So you want to take them inside, wash them, of course, dry them, remove any bad spots, the usual. And then after they're washed, pat them dry with paper towels. Get them nice and dry to, again, start the process a little bit earlier. We don't need to pre-treat herbs, so they are ready to dehydrate, or you can hang them. That's another way a lot of folks will dry their herbs. You would get some big pieces like this. I've got some rosemary here, and I've got some basil. You can get big bunches of these. Just put a string around them. It's recommended that you put a small paper bag, like a lunch bag, around them, punch holes in that, because these are going to take weeks to dry. You're going to want to hang them in an area of your house that doesn't have sun on it. It has some air circulation, but it's nice and warm. But we want to put a bag around them because they will get dusty. So if you put a paper bag around them that has holes punched in them, that can help. So again, that's when you're going to do a whole bunch of herbs to dry in a big group like that. Easy to do without any other special equipment. The other thing we do, of course, is dehydrate them. So when you dehydrate your herbs, you're going to prepare them as we mentioned before. They get dehydrated at a little bit lower temperature, usually like 95 to 105 degrees. They don't take very long. Some can be done in an hour. 4 hours at the most usually. It just depends on the herb itself. But same kind of process. We are of course going to use our mesh screen because they're going to get very crumbly. These will get very dry and they're going to fall through to the bottom. So what I would do is I will put them on my dehydrator tray, put on my mesh screen. I'm going to lightly spray, and then I can lay my herbs on there. So here I have some rosemary that I dehydrated ahead of time. You can just put it all on. This is the same product. You don't have to take it off the big stem. You can just dry it like this. So then when you're ready to use it or ready to store it, you can just take your fingers and pull down. And we want to keep, of course, that part, and then I can discard that stem. Just makes it a lot easier. I've done some basil here. Basil does turn really dark. That's just normal. That's just what's going to happen with it. It will also get very crumbly when it's dried. And I've got some dill here. Same thing. This is our fresh dill, nice and soft, and then it will get very, very dry. And again, I can pull it off the stem to use. It's recommended to store them in a glass jar or a nice heavy plastic bag, something like that. I've got some rosemary in here that I have done ahead of time.
It is recommended to try to keep them in bigger pieces till you're ready to use them. It just makes them last a little bit longer. Usually in a recipe I'm going to want that ground or cut up really small, but just store it like this and then I can pinch off what I need and use it that way. I want to share one little tip with you that I've recently learned that has helped me a lot when I'm dehydrating those herbs and they start to dry, they get kind of airy, right? They want to jump all over the place sometime. So it helps if you take those herbs, and I'm just going to do a little mix tray here, lay those on there, and take another one of your mesh screens and put it on top. And then you can put the lid on, and it just keeps them from blowing all over the place when they get really dry. So very easy to do, very quick, and a nice way to preserve for later. Next up is jerky. I've got some beef jerky I made here ahead of time. We have some really serious reminders on jerky though, because this can be a food safety issue. Of course, it's a food that has potential for a lot of foodborne illness. So remember, the USDA recommends that all meat that is going to be processed into jerky at home be heated ahead of time before you start the dehydrating process, that you heat it ahead of time to 160 degrees for beef, 165 degrees for poultry. So you're going to do that before you even start. Then once it's heated that way, you can put marinade on it if you want, however you want to prepare, maybe a rub, of course some other kind of flavorings you're going to want to put on there. And then you're going to put it in the dehydrator, 130 to 140 degrees. It's going to take several hours, as you know. We want to discard any leftover marinades that we had put our raw meat in and dry. When you want jerky, it's usually a little bit pliable, but also has probably crispy edges to it. And the same thing, no moisture should appear when I pull it back. Storage time for jerky is not very long. We recommend you using it within as little as 2 weeks, maybe 2 months. If you want, you can refrigerate it, keep it up to 6 months, or you can freeze it for a year. So just be careful to take that extra step. We really want you to have a good and safe product. It is recommended to use a lower fat meat. We don't want to put a lot of fat in the dehydrator because it gives off flavors, and of course it's going to change the temperature in there. So usually lower fat meats is what we're going to use. So enjoy your jerky. Now that our dehydration is all done, we want to package and store these in a way that they will be great to use the rest of the year. First, we're going to start by looking at our products. Remember how we were talking about conditioning to make sure it's been 7 to 10 days, I don't have any moisture, it's ready to go. So I could keep them in that jar I had, that's fine. Glass jars with lids are a great way to store dried foods. You can kind of see what's going on in there, and they look really appetizing, and again, it makes a really good medium. So you can get a smaller one for smaller amounts, that'll work. You can use the metal lids, you can use these plastic lids. Any are fine. Plastic bags also work fine. You do want to get the heavier weight ones, more like a freezer type bag. That will just make your products stay a little bit longer, better. Be sure and label them, as we recommend with any kind of food storage. Label and date them as to what they are, because sometimes you pick them up and you're not quite sure what that was. We do want to remove excess air when we store these. So here's my one green pepper I have in here. Again, I'm going to use a heavyweight bag. I would want to get my straw and to suck that air out of there. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in the freezing lesson, but we just don't want any excess air, because excess air will, of course, add moisture and just make the product degrade a little bit more quickly. So we want to keep those dried. They can be stored on your shelf. You don't want to store them in the sun. I know people that freeze their dried goods and they last even longer. That's up to you. Storage time depends on the food itself. Some things only last a couple months, some things last about a year. That's what we recommend totally on most of these products to use. Let's see, once you make sure that, again, we don't have a lot of heat coming on them. If my room is really warm, if it's close to 80 degrees, things just won't last near as long as they will as if my room is 65 degrees. So we want to keep that in mind. The other really good tip is to just package it into sizes that you will use. So if I'm going to do some dried fruit that I'm going to make a trail mix maybe later, I don't want to do a whole big bag of it because I don't want to keep opening it and shutting it because I'm introducing possible bacteria, I'm introducing moisture. So just go ahead and package it into small bags. That will work. You could vacuum seal them, tie them really tight, again, just to get that extra air out of there. That will help and make things last a little bit longer. So what to do with these? We mentioned a few things just as some reminders. Some things are great as snacks, not just the fruits or the fruit roll-ups, but even I know people that make like sweet potato crisps, you know, where you just dehydrate pieces of sweet potatoes, things like that that you might like to enjoy. A lot of the veggies, we mentioned soups and combination dish, they work really well for. So you're going to need to rehydrate them in those purposes. Often we can rehydrate them right in the dish. So again, if I'm making a soup, I will just put my dried green pepper, I'd go ahead and cut it up, but I'd put it in there. I'm going to need more moisture, I'm going to need more broth because I'm going to be using that broth to rehydrate. So that's one way you can do it. But you can also just rehydrate on top of the counter. You can cover, if I was going to do this green pepper again, I can just cover it with boiling water, let it sit, maybe 10-20 minutes, or I could just cover it with cold water, room temperature, and it takes 30 to 90 minutes to rehydrate. And you'll be able to tell, it just kind of gets, it's going to be a lot more pliable, but it's going to be back into a shape that you were used to when you were doing from the beginning. And I just want to close with saying, be adventurous. Some other things I've dehydrated that are really different is cantaloupe, and it just makes a nice snack too. It's just some of the things we don't think about. And I'm going to show you my tiny little experiment here. So this is zucchini. So this is just zucchini that I shredded, that I will often just freeze in shredded form for zucchini bread, things like that. But I thought I would dehydrate it. So I shredded it, put it in the dehydrator. I definitely used that mesh screen that we use on herbs, but I had rehydrated this before and made zucchini bread, and it turned out great. Now remember, I'm going to need a lot more because this shrinks down to about 20% of its original size. I think with this zucchini it was even more. So it's going to take more, but it's just a fun thing to do. It made a great bread. So be adventurous, enjoy, be safe. Again, look to us for your information. We're glad to provide it for you, and have fun.